Hank, members of the Foundation's Board of Governors, elected officials, several of you whom I've met this morning, members of the news media, friends, supporters, it is a real honor to be here this morning. It's a very fascinating time in the history of this country. Personally, for me, as I look for houses in Washington, D.C., as we're in the midst of hiring a staff of about 40 people, recognizing today that we have no statewide offices open, and in about 2 weeks we have to have 6 offices up and running. Recognizing the next 100 days in this country may well be the most significant 100 days in the next 3 decades of this country. It's a fascinating time. It's a privilege to be here, especially, and something which Tom did not mention, because I was invited to give this talk today in January of last year as Senator-elect Frist. Now, January of last year was just 10 months away, but 10 months ago, in January of last year, as I traveled, or 12 months, 11 months ago, as I traveled across Tennessee, at the same time I received your invitation to be here as Senator-elect, I couldn't get anybody in Tennessee to talk to me about even running for the United States Senator. So I especially appreciate the invitation to be here today. It's tough to know what to talk about because it is such a fascinating time in terms of the race over the last year, my past before that, and the contrast with what I'll be doing 3 weeks from now, that I don't know really where to start, but I want to give you sort of the overall picture. But it does remind me of the story of that minister who came from the Boston, Massachusetts, a very formal church there, came to a small town in Tennessee, showed up the first day to give a sermon there after being transferred there. He didn't really want to come to this small town in Tennessee, a farming community, showed up at the small church, and there was only one farmer there. He didn't know whether to continue or not, whether to wait till the next week, a bigger crowd, maybe several farmers, but he leaned over and said, well, what do you think? Should I go ahead? And that old farmer looked up and said, well, you know, I don't know about that sort of thing, but if I were to load up a truckload of hay and I were to take it out to the field to feed all the cows and only one cow were to show up, I'd feed that cow. So the minister got up there and went ahead and delivered a long, beautiful, he had his robes on, to this one farmer in the church, a long, beautiful sermon. Went on for an hour and a half, a little too long. But at the end of that, he leaned over and said, well, what did you think? How did I do? Because he really wanted to have a great first sermon. That old farmer looked up and said, well, you know, I don't know about that sort of thing, but if I were to load up a truckload of hay and I were to take it out to the field to feed all the cows and only one cow were to show up, I wouldn't make that one cow eat the whole truckload. Well, I am going to go through our whole truckload here, and I'll try to do it quickly so we can talk a little bit and not keep you here too long this morning in terms of questions about my impressions of this transition of our race and of the future as I see it over the next year. If there's ever been a race in Tennessee history that characterizes the power of individuals, the power of our elective process, it's really been this race that we undertook beginning about a year ago in the state of Tennessee. Today, December 14th, and we were just talking about Bob Guyton, who's a close friend of mine here at Emory, exactly 365 days ago, December 14th of this past year, at about 9 o'clock in the morning, so about an hour, 45 minutes from now, I walked out of an operating room at Vanderbilt University Medical Center having performed a heart transplant in a 41-year-old man who would have died without that heart transplant, exactly December 14th, 365 days ago. 1 year ago today, and here I stand before you as the Senator-elect from the state of Tennessee 365 days later. My presence here today is a testament not to me and not to Tom and not so much to the people that we assembled, to Whit and Pat and the group, as it is a testament to the reasons you're here today, to participate in the political process in whatever way possible, in the discussion of ideas, in the power of individuals, in the power of our elective system today. And let me try to put our race in perspective. How many of you here know, let me take somebody local. Senator Nunn. How many people in here have heard Senator Nunn? Everybody. Overall, 98, 99, 100% name recognition in the state of Tennessee, in the state of Georgia, and around this country. And then how many of you know Dr. John Welchel in the room? 1, 2, 3, 4. Dr. Welchel is head of Emory University's transplant team. And to draw an analogy of me standing before you today and the power that you have in your grasp, within your reach, Bill Frist, transplant surgeon, Vanderbilt University Medical Center, challenging James Sasser, 98, 99, 100% name recognition, chairman of the Senate Budget Committee in Washington, D.C., is almost exactly analogous to Dr. John Welchel running against Sam Nunn 365 days from now. Yet it is possible because I've just done it. And I stand before you as someone, by your support, by the support of individuals like you who accomplished that. I took a leave of absence from my medical practice on December 15th, 364 days ago. Had a mission, had a vision. 2 weeks later, January 1st, opened our campaign office. The following day, had a fax machine, 3 staff people on board, borrowed a lot of furniture. We were up and running. The only other thing that I had at that point in time was the support of my family, Karen, my 3 boys, my extended family, and some friends. And most of them saw the vision. They heard me talk, but deep in their hearts, though they were very supportive of me, really had some doubt as to whether or not we could win. Now, in Tennessee, as every state, there's political uniqueness. In Tennessee, we have East Tennessee, we have Middle Tennessee, we have West Tennessee. Over in East Tennessee, they're predominantly Republicans. In Middle Tennessee, it's predominantly Democrat, though a reasonable concentration of Republicans. In West Tennessee, it's almost all Democrat except for a few suburbs right around Memphis, the suburbs of Memphis. The political pundits, as well as the experienced politicians in Tennessee, said that you had to be from East Tennessee to win a statewide race as a Republican candidate. Or you have had to run a race before and have sufficient name ID to run a statewide race. And clearly, therefore, I could not win this race. There is no way that a candidate, Bill Frist from Middle Tennessee, could win according to Tennessee tradition in politics. Now, I'd never run for public office. I'd never served in public office. I was from Middle Tennessee. And as many of you know, and as people on my staff remind me every single day, for a period of my life, and I don't even want to tell you how long it was, I didn't even vote. I didn't participate in the political process because I thought that our elected officials were taking care of me, of my children, of society generally. We had elected them, and I had trust in our United States Congress. I thought that they were doing what is right. And I woke up, as many of you have in the past, and said that I'm part of the problem. Yet I can be part of the solution. And I believe that is exactly what the Georgia Public Policy Foundation promotes. An individual, by participating in whatever way, support of a candidate, being here today, the discussion of ideas, can really change this country and be a part of the solution. Tennessee was the only state in the country this year which had 3 statewide offices open. We had the governor's race, we had the old Al Gore seat race, which was a 2-year seat to be filled, and we had Jim Sasser's seat. All were held by Democrats. Traditional Tennessee Republican politicians said that in this race, what we really needed is somebody from each of the 3 grand divisions. From the West Division, there was Don Sundquist, Republican candidate. From Middle Tennessee, Fred Thompson was running from the open seat. And in our primary, there were 6 people running, of which I was from Middle Tennessee, but there was a candidate from East Tennessee. And the traditional political people in Tennessee said we need a candidate in order to get 1 win or 2 wins this year, somebody from Middle, West, and East Tennessee. I, not being from East Tennessee, clearly was not the favored candidate among the Republican Party at that point in time. They strategized that by having somebody from each segment of Tennessee that would be able to get out enough voters to fill at least or win at least 1 of those races, possibly 2 of those 3 races, although nobody at that point in time thought we could win all 3 races because everybody agreed that Jim Sasser simply could not be beat. Well, I have never been one to follow the herd very much. I've never been one to listen to the herd very much, and have been a contrarian most of my life in terms of the things that I've attempted to do with the vision that I've had. Now, I did talk to a number of political consultants from Washington, and they seem to be part of the herd mentality, saying, well, you can't beat this guy. There's no way to beat an 18-year incumbent. So I'm somewhat of a contrarian, somewhat of non-traditional, and so I looked around the country for the most unusual, maybe even a little bit strange person in the world who helped me to do this. Somebody who is a contrarian, little bit of controversy about him, and lo and behold, who did I find? But this guy here, Tom Perdue. And we proceeded to put together a staff, many of whom you know, which includes Whit and Pat, who most of you know or have been introduced to, and a group of people which I'm very proud of, all of whom have been very focused, very loyal, with a very simple message that concentrated over the past year. Now, why run it all? And Tom implied, I'm a father, I have 3 sons, I'm worried about the future of this country, I feel that I, as an individual, can make a difference. In addition, I, unlike even most senators today, come out of the private sector for the last 20 years, and I've watched the federal government over the last 20 to 30 years continue to bleed through increased regulations the spirit of this country, that entrepreneurial spirit, the promotion of private enterprise and small business. So I bring that perspective of family as well as that perspective of decreased federal regulation, more individual responsibility to the United States Senate, and that's why I ran. In addition, I felt that I, as an individual, could make a difference. Just like 365 days ago, I lifted that heart out of this fellow Tom McAndrew, a 41-year-old man. I made a difference in his life, so I know that individuals can make a difference, and deep in my heart, I felt I could make a difference by running for the United States Senate and serving there for a period of time. And yes, people ask me again and again, Bill Frist, and this is even 4 months ago, Bill Frist, do you really feel that you as an individual can make a difference in the United States Senate? You're a political novice, you're going to be part of a minority party, you're going to be 100 out of 100 United States senators, you don't know how to play the game, and the system can never be changed. And that was even 3 months ago. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I stand before you today saying that yes, we have had a political earthquake in this country. I'm going to be part of a majority party. I bring in a body of experience to that body which is non-existent. There has not been a physician in the United States Senate since 1923, a practicing physician. But even 3 months ago, people were asking me those questions again and again. Now, not knowing how the Senate works or whether I could really be effective or whether or not we would have a majority party, deep inside, I could answer that question about will you make a difference? Yes. By beating Jim Sasser, who is a leader, but he's leading this country, or was leading this country, down the road of failed public policy, by just defeating Jim Sasser, removing him from that leadership position. Even before I served one day in the United States Senate, I can honestly feel that I've made a difference in changing the direction of this country. Now, so deep inside, I felt I could beat him. Tom, I think, felt I could beat him. But within a month or so, I was absolutely convinced, we all were as part of our team, by sharing this vision for this country, and this is about a year ago, with enough people over a period of 11 months that we could win this primary and win this general election. The vision is there. People feel it. Not just in rooms like this, but in country stores and on farms all across this country. People wanted it, and we could feel that. That's where the media is so important, because it was a race over a period of 9 months to get out and share that vision with enough people, because people wanted it. People were ready for it. People were waiting for new leadership. And that's where Pat, as you well know, and the people at this table accomplished that so effectively, coupling it with me being in the road talking to people one-on-one. Well, we set out in January to do all of that. And I can tell you, nobody was calling. Tom and I and the secretary would sit in that office on the telephone, and it would take a couple of days for people to get back to us when we called. People said it can't be done. People said Bill Frost, and I said Bill Frist. And I would hear Tom in there explaining how to spell my name over and over to these people. The mail wasn't coming in. We sent out 270 Christmas cards and requested a little bit of money, and everybody wrote back, well, it was great to receive your Christmas card, but there were no checks in there at all initially. But again, I knew that we could do it if we could share the vision. I knew that I'd have to prove myself as a candidate. People weren't going to believe it. And so I would go out and tell people who would give me the time of day that my goal was to build the broadest-based campaign, challenger race that Tennessee had ever seen. I told them that I would build a county organization in all 95 counties in the primary, something that had never been done in a Republican primary in the history of Tennessee. I told them that I was going to raise money from thousands of Tennesseans, and people laughed. People said, the political people, the political pundits, even the professional fundraisers, they said, Bill Frist, you're a doctor. You have resources to put in this race. Nobody's going to give to you. And I said, I'm not going to put one dime into this race until I go out and have thousands of people invest in me, invest in my vision. And then at that point in time, we'll put my own resources into this race. People said it can't be done. I took that as a challenge, and we went out and did it. I told people that, and it was almost a quote, I'd say, watch me. I'd go by and I'd talk to them, and they'd say yes and listen very politely. I'd say, just watch me. Watch me over the next several months. Watch how we conduct our campaign. Watch how we communicate with people. Watch how we paint this vision. But I'm going to come back, and I'm going to come back a month from now or 2 months from now or 3 months from now. And after watching me, you feel I've earned your respect. I'm going to ask you for a contribution, and then I want you to invest in me. Then we officially announced on March 1st, we had a statewide fly-around. By that time, I'd campaigned in about 20 counties. We'd put together a semblance of a statewide county-by-county organization. Pat Sibley came and said, we got to do something different. We've got to be non-traditional. We can't go win this race head-to-head with traditional politics. And Pat and Tom and Whit and I sat around the table with a couple of other people, and Pat came up with the idea of doing a 2-minute infomercial to introduce me. So on March 3rd, we announced on March 1st, on March 3rd, we had what's called a roadblock, which Pat calls a roadblock. I don't know enough about it to know what a roadblock is. But it's all I know is that for a 2-minute period in Tennessee, all across the state, out to 5 or 6 million people across the state of Tennessee, if you were watching TV that night, you had to learn something about Bill Frist, because Pat bought 2 minutes on every network, on every station in the state of Tennessee to introduce Bill Frist to the public broadly. And it worked. And people recognized that we began to do things differently. That was a unique marketing effort. And in truth, if you look at our campaign, people will go back, and in Tennessee say this over and over, that we introduced a number of unique concepts that changed the rules of Tennessee politics. As I mentioned, we had our primary organization in all 95 counties. We ran a statewide race in our primary when all the political pros said, you don't need to do that. Concentrate on 8 Republican counties and you can win the primary. Forget the rest of the state. We didn't do that. We paid attention to all 95 counties. And no Republican candidate in the history of Tennessee had gone out and reached out to independents and to Democrats in a Republican primary. Everything had been traditionally tailored just to the Republican people listening. We didn't do that. I would get up and stand before groups just like this and reach out for independent support, Democratic support, Perot voter support, anybody who is willing to share that vision. We used more direct mail than any campaign in the history of Tennessee. We began television early. We opened our office 24 hours a day in July. And the great thing about it, I'd be on the road, and as Tom said, I don't sleep all that much. And at about 3 o'clock in the morning, what do? I'm used to transplanting through the middle of the night, at least 1 to 2 nights a week for the last 12 years of my life. And therefore, I'm up a lot in the middle of the night. And it's so wonderful to have a campaign headquarters open 24 hours a day, because at 3 o'clock in the morning, I'd be used to going home at 3 o'clock in the morning and either waking up Karen and she'd say, go down and play with the dog. But now what you can do, or what you could do for that 4 or 5 month period is call, because always in the middle of the night there'd be somebody there answering that phone 24 hours a day. But it made a difference. It showed that we were reaching out, we were receptive, we were listening, we were there to serve people broadly. We also had hundreds of so-called home events, and home events are something that Phil Graham, who I know is just here, really encouraged me to do. And home events are where you have an event at home. It's not really a fundraiser. I wish they were all fundraisers. But for me, I would have a friend who would invite friends in, sit down, have coffee, and talk politics for 15 or 20 minutes, and I could paint this vision. And I can tell you the home events were probably the core to our campaign. But in January and February and March and April, a home event might be me and Karen, my wife, and if I was worried, I'd take my oldest son and the two hosts and maybe one other person. Nobody was really very much interested in a 42-year-old heart surgeon who had no chance of beating Jim Sasser when there were two other statewide races going on. Well, I didn't get discouraged. I guess I did get discouraged. And I'd go back and talk to Tom, and I'd say, Tom, I'm not sure about these home events. And Tom said, just keep doing them. And we did them. And we would do 1 a night, and 2 a night, and 3 a night. And over time, 5 people would be there, 10 people, 15, 20, and then 30 and 40 people. And I can tell you, everybody said, oh, these are great things, these are fundraisers. I wasn't about to ask anybody to pay money to come, because then I know we wouldn't have anybody show up at these home events. But it got out that we were doing them, and we do them around the state, and we painted that vision from a really grassroots level. In August, we had 6 opponents, or I had 5 opponents. Conventional wisdom, as I mentioned, that was to concentrate on 8 counties. We weren't going to do that. There was an East Tennessee candidate, and he was the person and he was financially supported very well, that we ran a very tough race against. Throughout that primary, I used the strategy of not running against my primary opponents, but ran against Jim Sasser. The political pundit said that was political suicide. How in the world can you run against Jim Sasser when you got 5 people out there? I reasoned that the only way to beat an 18-year entrenched incumbent is to define him, and define him over a period of time, and he couldn't be beat by winning in 8 counties and then trying over a 3-month period. Our primary is in August, and then trying over a 3-month period to run against Jim Sasser. So from day one, we ran against Senator Sasser, former Senator Sasser, in the sort of like right now, things move so fast. I go out and meet people. I didn't do it here today, but as I meet people, I'm still asking for their vote. But we ran against Sasser, and that would make people mad. The media didn't like it, yet it worked, because people recognized that we were the only candidate who could beat Jim Sasser. We spent a 6-month period defining Jim Sasser's voting record for what he was, because people in Tennessee simply did not know that. We didn't get drawn into the primary battles, and by the end, up until our primary was in early August, as I mentioned, people were running against me, and I was running against Jim Sasser, and we won that race. It was a great preparatory process for me. It was a very tough primary, one of the toughest primaries, I think, in the country, but it was a great process for me in terms of interacting with people, in terms of getting that message out and defining Jim Sasser. In the general election, we stuck with the simple message. We didn't change gear. We stayed focused. No different than what you do in heart transplantation or lung transplantation. You've got a goal, you've got a project, you've got a strategy, you stick with it, you don't get drawn to the side, you do it with discipline, you do it with focus, you don't get sidetracked, and that's what we did. We did some new things, as I mentioned. Our TV ads on the screen, we documented all of Senator Sasser's votes. We went after his voting record. We stayed focused on his voting record. We stuck with that simple message throughout. Now, by the end of the election, 365 days ago from today, I was in an operating room transplanting this fellow. By the end of that election, we had over 10,000 Tennesseans contribute to our campaign. We'd mailed over 3 million pieces of direct mail. We had made over 2 million volunteer and paid phone calls. We'd involved over 9,000 Tennesseans, volunteers, in our campaign headquarters or at our staff offices across the state. And I have to comment on 2 things, and again, they've been mentioned, and that is Pat Sibley, who really helped get that message out, and also Whit Ayers. And actually, I met Whit before I met Tom. Whit called one day, and it was actually through the church, some sort of contact. Whit came up to Nashville. I was in my scrubs when Whit and I first met. I just finished an operation, and Whit and I met about 3 months before I'd met Tom. And I told Whit, this is what I'm going to do. I need your help to do it. And even Whit, I think, you kind of wondered a little bit about this heart surgery. You didn't. And ever since then, I've worked with Whit, and the polling that Whit did made it possible for us to go through the primary and the general election and develop a strategy that really made this race possible. And I really do want to thank Whit for that. And Pat, I know that you're sponsoring this breakfast today, but if I look back at my books and I see how much money that I paid both you and Whit over the last year, I think that it's Bill Frist who paid for each of these dinners today. The campaign couldn't be done. It couldn't be done without it. And again, and that's a beautiful sweater. Did I buy that sweater you have on as well? And at Christmas, are you going to have? That's great. Well, when the dust settled, that's how we went about it. When the dust settled, we won. Now, on November the 8th, was all this part of anti-incumbency? Because it's hard, you can't even read and get a feel for it. On November the 8th, there were 26 incumbent United States senators who ran for public office. 24 of those incumbent senators won. So it's not part of anti-incumbency. Only 2 incumbent United States senators were defeated on November the 8th. One of those was Harris Wofford from Pennsylvania, and the other was James Sasser from the state of Tennessee. So yes, there's a big anti-incumbency feel out there, but in the United States Senate today, 24 out of 26 incumbents won their races. Jim Sasser was defeated. An 18-year incumbent was defeated. We felt it. I could feel it as we went around. Whit's data reinforced that, but nobody in Washington, D.C. felt it. None of the media in Tennessee felt it up until about 1 or 2 days before the race. We had reassurance from Whit. I could feel it in the field that vision of less government regulation, and more individual responsibility is one that was going to speak loudly on November the 8th. Now, many of you supported me with your contributions, and I've been able to say thank you to several of you, and wanted to thank others in very special ways to make this election possible, because that is really, and that's why I really wanted to go into some detail of how a newcomer such as myself can now be in the United States Senate, because it's with support, direct and indirect, of people such as yourself. As it turned out, people all across the country. We didn't defeat that many incumbents, but a whole new, more conservative, younger group is now in Washington, D.C. And although anti-incumbency is a message, it didn't really take place that much in the United States Senate. 1/2 of the United States Congress today, the Senate and House combined, has been elected since 1990. That's pretty impressive. So there is a lot of newness, a lot of new blood in the United States Senate as well as Congress today. Now, I feel very comfortable that we did assemble a fantastic team. But again, as I opened and said, it's not testament to me or that team, but it's testament really to each of you today, as you've contributed to various campaigns, as you've contributed to the Georgia Public Policy Foundation, that individuals indeed make a difference. Now, my vision for this country, as you can tell, is that the American dream must be preserved. It's got to be preserved. Yet over the last 30 to 40 years in this country, in large part because Congress has lost touch with our values, that American dream has been diminished, where my children and your children and our grandchildren have less opportunity today than we have had or than our parents have had. It can be actively changed, and we are in that process, in the very early stages of that process, and that process has just begun. And we're returning, as all of you know, to that goal, that philosophy of our founding fathers of less government, more individual responsibility, less regulations, more of the local control of government, more school boards, more county, more municipal government, less federal government. Getting things out of the federal hands, into the state hands, and into local hands. Term limits have been a big issue, and I think term limits are a key ingredient to the reform that is necessary in Congress today. 12 years is plenty of time for someone to come from the private sector, spend 6 years, maybe 12 years, or less time, and make a contribution to this country through public service. Our forefathers very clearly envisioned people like you and people like me going to the United States Senate or to Congress for a period of time, making that contribution with a mission to accomplish and not a career to protect, and then come home and live under the laws that are passed. It's the concept of the citizen legislator, and you'll hear people talk about it as term limits. You'll hear people talk about it of going up, working for 6 months, cutting pay, and coming home for 6 months and going back and forth. But the whole thought process, the whole philosophy is to get people like you and me in the United States Senate. Now, even this year, you can say that we're making progress, and we are, but there are 11 new United States senators, and if you look at them more carefully, and it's revolutionary, we have 11, all from the same party, all with a mandate. 10 of the 11 ran on term limits. But if you look at even the 11 senators in my freshman class, Bill Frist is the only newcomer. So yes, we've got fresh blood. 11 senators, that's 1/4 of all Republicans with a consistent voice, so clearly we'll have an impact. That's 11% of the entire United States Senate. It's fresh blood, it's new, and so forth. But in truth, if you look at those 11, I'm the only outsider. I'm the only one from the private sector. Of the 11, 7 are in Congress today and moved from the House to the United States Senate, which there's nothing wrong with that, but they're not bringing new blood from the private sector. 1 is a governor. 2 were aides in Washington, D.C. for high-level officials, and then there's me. So we have a lot to do. It's been a revolution. It's been a political earthquake, but still we need to be out and encourage new people to come from the private sector, spend a period of their life there, and then go home. Now, what's happened since November the 8th? We've been going nonstop, haven't really taken a break. I need to find a house. I need to find schools for my 3 boys. We, from day one, began working committees, planning the agenda in Washington for the next, really, 3 months, 4 months. We have been included on every working committee from day one as senators-elect before we're even being sworn in. We, as a group and as individuals, are recognized at every meeting in these Senate working groups. And therefore, I can share with you my impression over the last 3 months that we will be listened to. In 2 of the last 3 meetings, which were agenda-setting meetings, the agenda was initially set by the chairman of the meeting, and within 30 minutes, the agenda had essentially been taken over by the freshman class in terms of this is what we feel, this is what we've seen on the campaign trail the last year, and people are listening. And that should be reassuring to you. It's reassuring to me because, as I said, I don't know how that body really works, and there's no way to know until you get there, but I can stand before you today and say that I feel very good that we are being listened to and that people recognize in the United States Senate today that we were elected with a mandate and a mandate to change. On the House side, your own Newt Gingrich is taking a real leadership role. The Contract with America, which is a 10-point plan that all of you have seen different pieces of, will be addressed within the first 100 days, which will really be by about April 15th, that those issues will be voted upon. In the United States Senate today, in our agenda-setting meeting yesterday morning, and I'm not sure again how much Phil Graham mentioned the other day, but unfunded mandates will be passed within the first 3 weeks. Number 1. Number 2, a balanced budget amendment will be introduced and likely voted upon within the first 60 to 70 days, and which will be. And the third issue which will come forward is having the United States Congress obey the laws of the land which are passed. And the fourth issue, and I'm not sure if it's even made the press, and I just pulled it out of my suitcase because I got it yesterday in meeting with Senator Dole yesterday morning. He has sent a letter to the President of the United States calling for a moratorium on all regulations, that there can be no new regulations passed. The significance of that letter, which was signed by the leadership, should powerfully speak to the fact that our leadership is very committed to cutting back regulations on small business, on large business, and that will be done in these first 100 days. Now, you have many new members of Congress with Saxby Chambliss, Charlie Norwood, Bob Barr. I had the chance to meet with several of those in Crossing during our orientation sessions. You have a Speaker of the House who will be, in many ways, the centerpiece of what happens over the next 6 months. Democrats and Republicans are going to work together. I've also been impressed by Bob Dole's comments about that we need to bring everybody together, bring the Senate together, talk, get to know each other, and really have a bipartisan approach to politics over the balance of this century. And that's actually impressed me a great deal because I didn't know how much partisanship to expect. But I say all this, we've come a long way, but want to share with you something that I feel. I've just come through a great campaign, and I've loved the process, as you can tell. I had people, my wife especially thinks it's a little bit strange that I've loved this process of campaign, but I've loved it. But my job has just begun in the United States Senate today. And I'd like to leave with you that I think your job has just begun as well. And your job is going to take many, many shapes and many forms. One is going to be to hold people like myself accountable for what we ran on. You need to hold your elected officials' feet to the fire. You need to make them honor their campaign commitments. Restore accountability to the elective process, to the way we run campaigns today. You need to encourage your elected officials. Support them where they need to be supported. Support them on tough decisions they have to make. And if you disagree, let them know. Pick up the phone, write a letter, talk to them. Communicate with them if you're disappointed. Don't just turn around to the people in your office and say he or she made a bad mistake. Let them know and let them know why. We as citizens, we as taxpayers, and we as voters must follow through with our individual responsibility. And again, your being here today shows that you have an interest in that process. The Georgia Public Policy Foundation, through its members, and again, through its members, I think is very important, has been a catalyst for the sorts of common sense proposals that I ran on that are shared by the majority of Americans today, but which need a voice, which need a forum for discussion. It happens through membership, not just through the sign and not just through the board of directors, but through the membership. And I would like to encourage the board members here today, the leadership of the Georgia Public Policy Foundation, and each of you to do what Tom suggested, and that is to go out and recruit new members to participate in discussions just like this. Because it's through discussions like this, discussions at the table, discussions around the table at home based on ideas that you hear, that elected representatives listen and ultimately act upon. So I'd encourage you to go out and increase that membership. Whether you run for public office yourself, and clearly that's the role that I've chosen for myself, or whether you support someone for public office today, or have a home event for somebody, or contribute to them financially, or participate in the Georgia Public Policy Foundation, you, as individuals here today, have the power to change America. And I stand before you as a beneficiary of that, of somebody who started with nothing, started with no political base, and through the process that I just told you about, through the process of being here today, will serve in the United States Senate. Now, this is one of the most exciting times in the history of this country. I say that as a student of history. I say it in the last 3 weeks talking to people who have been in the United States Senate for years, by talking to people who have followed the political process, that the change is real. It is incumbent upon us to make that change occur really over a pretty short period of time. And again, several of us were talking before that we don't have a long period of time. We really need to deliver this year. But what we deliver this year is likely to set the course of this government and of our society for the next 20 years or the next 25 years. Now, I don't want a career in Washington. I told you about term limits. I really don't need a career in Washington. I have a wonderful career in medicine and want to go there for a period of time. Yet I promise you that I will spend every waking hour, every hour that I possibly can, paying back people for the respect, for their confidence in me, because I feel like I've earned the respect as a candidate, but now need to deliver as a United States Senator. I ask that each of you leave here today committed to increase the membership of this foundation over the next 2 to 3 months, double it. Just make that a goal. If you don't set goals, when I started this thing, if I didn't say I'm going to be a United States Senator, I wouldn't be here today. And again, I'm not sure what sort of planning goes on in the foundation, but I would like to ask your board, your chairman, to really have that as a goal, is to double the foundation membership over the next 60 days. With that, people will have a forum such as myself to talk, to discuss, to bring ideas forward. Now, I think I'll close, and again, I probably went on way too long, but and we can ask if we have time to answer a few questions, but let me say that, as you can tell, I'm very close to Georgia. I'm very close to this foundation. I'm very close to Tom Perdue, Whit Ayers, Pat Sibley, and many of you who've contributed to my campaign. And I'd just like to ask that over the next 6 years, over the balance of this century, if you will consider me your third senator from the state of Georgia. I will take some questions, but a story which many of you heard is let me just close with this, is that little boy who did write a letter to God for $100, asking for $100. I'm not sure what he was going to use it for. He prayed and prayed and prayed for about 2 weeks. Prayers didn't answer, so he wrote that letter to God, and the Postal Service got it, said, God, please send me $100. I prayed for 2 weeks. I'm very disappointed. They didn't know where to send it, so they sent it over to Bill Clinton at the White House. And Bill Clinton was very touched. He's a very sensitive man, very considerate. And so he told the secretary, send that little boy back $5. Just send a check on there for $5. And Clinton clearly thought that would be a lot to a 6-year-old boy, $5. Little boy was delighted when he got back from Washington this $5. And he sat down and wrote a thank you note to God. And all of you probably heard what the thank you note said. And it said, Dear God, thank you very much for sending me the money. However, I noticed that for some reason you had to send it through Washington, and as usual, those thieves deducted $95. Thank you. I'd be happy to answer questions for 4 or 5 minutes if you'd like about anything. Yes, sir.
As a doctor, what do you think is going to happen to health care?
Yeah, as I mentioned, there has not been anybody in the United States Senate since 1923 who's ever taken care of a patient. If we want that to be a citizen legislator, we have to do things like term limits that will encourage a broader array of people to come to the United States Senate. Last year, it was a close call because there was nobody in the United States Senate to say that choice is important, to say that we've got the greatest health care system in the world, but we've got problems, and the problems can be fixed without destroying the system. What I've done is systematically talk to each of the senators who've been involved. I talked to Senator Packwood, Nancy Kassenbaum, Don Nichols in the last week to get some sort of feel on what the agenda will be. Health care was not part of the contract with America in the House. It was part of the 7 principles outlined by the Senate. I think we'll see very little over the first 6 months in health care legislation. In the last 6 months, we will see insurance reform. We will look at portability, we'll look at pre-existing illness, and there will be insurance reform. There will be some debate whether that should be at the federal level or at the state level. Tort reform, I personally don't feel in talking to them that that's going to come up this year as a single item. I think we will see, from a Medicaid standpoint, more control given to the states, although I have no idea. My gut feeling is that there are going to be some sort of per capita caps on things like Medicaid to get some sort of control, though I don't know that. That has not been discussed or said or told to me by any of the United States senators. Most of that will be discussed in the Finance Committee and through Labor and Human Services. Incremental reform, not major reform. It'll probably continue over the next 6 years each year. As you cross the country now, health care is about the 3rd issue. People recognize we need to target what's wrong without destroying the greatest system in the world. Yes, sir.
Senator, committee assignments have been done in the Senate yet?
Committee assignments. On the House side, they have. Several interesting things in the first month. There's a commitment to cut back overall numbers of people on committees so that a United States Senator can really participate in the committees. Number 2, one of the resolutions which was passed early on among the caucus that we all participated in is to cut back the size of Congress by 25% in terms of the number of people on the payroll overall. It may not, we don't know whether that's going to be personal staff, committee staff, GAO, but to cut the size of Congress by 25% was one of the first resolutions. Thirdly, as a freshman senator, I was named to the Committee on Committees, and that is the committee which makes committee assignments. That says, it's hard to know exactly what that means, but at least it should mean to you and to me that the United States Senate recognizes that the freshman senators are players, the fact that I'm even on that committee. And then to answer your question, finally, the committee assignments will take place beginning next Monday or Tuesday, depending on when the Democratic leadership and the Republican leadership get together to see what the ratios are, how many Republicans, how many Democrats on each committee. That has been proposed by Bob Dole, waiting for a Democrat response. Hopefully that'll come today or tomorrow, and committee assignments will begin next week, and we'll know by Christmas. Yes, sir.
If you're going to pass a balanced budget amendment, it seems to me that at some point in time, Congress is going to have to address Social Security. Can you see that happening?
Right now, the question is balanced budget amendment, entitlement, Social Security. As all of you know today, either today or tomorrow, recommendations will be made by the Entitlement Commission, which Bob Kerrey and Jack Danforth chair. And remember, Bob Kerrey was assigned to that committee as a trade-off for his vote back with the largest tax increase in the history of this country, which I don't have to run against Jim Sasser anymore, which Jim Sasser was chairman of the Senate Budget Committee, and that's why he needed to be defeated. I got to get out of this campaign mode. But entitlements have to be addressed, with entitlements being 53% of our overall spending today and growing at a rate that is much faster than discretionary spending. I think all entitlements are going to have to be addressed. Social Security is put off the table for now. At some point in the future, clearly Social Security is going to need to be looked at and addressed. It'll be interesting to see how the Entitlement Commission handles that. Likely, what they're going to propose is raising retirement age from 65 to 70 years of age and some sort of cost of living. But it'll be interesting to see what they say today and then to look at the political response. But everything essentially is going to have to be on the table. I ran putting Social Security aside, as do most people today. At sometime over the next 30 years, it's going to have to be addressed. Yes, sir.
As I follow the election from down here, everything we heard about Jim Sasser, which was a real anomaly, that he was in favor of school prayer. He came out in favor of school prayer, and everybody across the country said, Jim Sasser, school prayer. And it was kind of an oxymoron of sorts. And what is your impression of, was Jim Sasser running from you? Was he running toward the people? Was it a value issue? What exactly was going on? Why was he getting that?
Yeah, I think everybody heard that. Jim Sasser ran on very conservative platform while we were still in our primary. About 3 to 4 weeks before our primary, he came on television, then stayed on television. But he came out initially with two things. One was on immigration, and immigration in Tennessee is not a big issue, but nationally, it is a relatively big issue, but it's not the issue that your average Tennessean is just focused on. And then his second television ad was that how conservative he was. And the two examples were for school prayer, against pornography, and tough on crime. The problem with that, if you look at Jim Sasser's record, he has not been tough on crime, he has never fought pornography, and he's never been for school prayer. Now, what that says is that here you have Jim Sasser, the most powerful leader of the Democratic Party today, unlimited resources, $2 million in PAC funds, access to the best media consultants in the world, access to the best polling in the world, access to the best consultants in the world, and he comes out making a very obvious mistake like that and became the laughingstock of the country, because here's a man pretending to be something he's not, in response, because probably some advisors came in and said, to win an election in Tennessee in 1994, you got to be conservative, and he's not conservative. And that's where we are good. When I say we, I mean we as a group, is that we went after him with a vengeance, and we put his voting record out there. He said he's for school prayer. You look at 20 votes, he's not for school prayer. He says he's tough on crime. He shepherded through this last crime bill, which wasn't tough on crime, and we went after him and stayed after him and stayed focused and stayed disciplined, and ultimately it explained his defeat. You might be able to get away with that elsewhere, different race, different time, but you don't get away with that with Tom Perdue.